Welcome, sir.
Let me whip it off. I had one made up with the with my own face, but it was much scarier than this. It was just kind of creepy looking because it was kind of like the wrong size, you know. It looked like I just had this like weird kind of smile on my face. I guess you guys have been partying without me.
Doing our best.
You know, I like to. It's really funny because I like to say. I like to say to people as a joke. I say, you know, they're like, "Oh my God, you were the first thing that I saw that was horror and stuff like that." I go, you know, well, the Crypt Keeper is the gateway drug to horror, right? I expect people to laugh, but they don't. They go, "Yeah, that's true." Yep. It is. You know, I mean, what kid wouldn't like have to stop at the TV set to look at some fucked up looking puppet, you know, laughing at them and scaring the shit out of them? It's kind of like when you know, when you go to the amusement park and people are like, "Let's go on that roller coaster," and you're a little kid, you're like, "I'm not going on that thing." And then you finally go on and you're like, "Oh, I want one bigger, I want one scarier, I want one badder." You know, it's like the Crypt Keeper is kind of like that, you know?
Or like the haunted house, like the Haunt, you know, with the
Right.
actors and stuff. Oh, I don't want it scary, but it's so
Yeah.
exciting and intriguing.
Yeah.
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 Welcome back, John.
Thanks. Thank you guys for coming. This is a great turnout. I really appreciate you being here. You know, after 43 years as an actor, going from, I mean, as a kid, I loved acting. I loved Tales from the Crypt comic books. You know, I used to collect these. I used to have to hide them from my mother. You know, because, you know, I don't know if any of you, some of you probably do know that the age codes that are on comic books today are because of the EC Comics, because they were, you know, literally trying to go to Congress and get them banned.
Yeah.
You know, they said they caused juvenile delinquency. In fact, I think that the Tales, you know, if you have the box set, the behind the screens, you know, extra DVD that's in the first season,
Yeah.
you know, talks about all the history of Tales from the Crypt from comic book to what it is today.
It's about 45 minutes, an hour. It's a really,
Something like that.
it's a really, really educational documentary on
Yeah.
comic books in general.
It's interesting though.
It really
you know,
is.
like they got some drugged up kid and they start like, you know, interviewing him. What got you like this? Comic books, you know, and they're trying to get them banned and stuff, you know. But you know, I used to, you know, do all kinds of crazy stuff, and my mom used to make her own clothes and that kind of thing. She would make me costumes and stuff so I could become whatever I wanted to become. So, you know, once I became an actor, of Gory Cooper, Robert Redford, you know, it was something that I really enjoyed being able to do that kind of thing. I used to do the morning announcements with my buddy Fred. You know, the following morning announcement brought to you by a grant from the Mogul Corporation. And we would do imitations of the Teachers and the Beatles and all this stuff. And I think that was probably my first introduction to voice acting. And, you know, I'd always loved it and always thought it would be something good to do, but I didn't really have the opportunity. Although I did all kinds of characters and voices in my stand-up, I never really had an opportunity to do it professionally until my first series on HBO, which was First and 10. And they knew that I did voices and characters and invited me down to Kevin Yeager's studio, where he was, you know, and for those of you that know Kevin Yeager to be one of the most awesome creature makers and practical effects artists in the business, had made Chucky and designed Freddy Krueger's look, and I mean all kinds of really great stuff. In fact, they didn't give him much budget to start with. HBO was still starting out. They didn't have a lot of money to give us to do certain things. And so he was using spare parts on the Crypt Keeper, and actually used some spare Chucky eyes in the Crypt Keeper. I think he thought originally that would just be temporary, but then when he saw how much it made him look more charming, you know, he kept it, you know, which was kind of cool. But the original puppet, when we went to, after I got the part, when I went in and did it for Kevin, he had been listening to all kinds of voices and he wasn't hearing it, you know, and I think because, you know, I had grown up with the comic books and understood that he was supposed to be funny and scary and all these things all at the same time, And, you know, I saw that the puppet he made had holes in his throat and rotten teeth, and that's where the, you know, the gravelly, juicy voice that I came up with came from. I started doing that. He was like, you know, he's like doing this. He starts laughing, and I start laughing. I go, great. Crypt Keeper laughs at his own jokes. Perfect, you know. And kept going. And he loved it so much, he went to the producers and said, if you don't hire this guy, I'm not doing it. Because, you know, that's how much he thought it was perfect for it. So, I mean, I really have a lot to thank Kevin for in terms of, you know, that character, in terms of doing that character. And, you know, like I said, 43 years as an actor, for people to remember anything that you've done. I mean, I could name you sitcom after sitcom that I did, or part in some, you know, whether it's the Three Stooges movie as Shemp, or well, like that, and they go, oh, that was you, you know, or oh, I don't remember that, you know, I was too young to have watched that or whatever. And those are the things that like paid for my house and stuff. I mean, the Crypt Keeper never really paid for a lot of anything, you know. You worked for scale, and the stars worked for scale, but it was a really cool project. And for that to have been the thing that's lasted all these years, that people are like, oh, I know you from that, you know, and having collected the comic books is just, it's great. I'm sure there are people that have come here to these conventions and signed for things that they probably hated. You know, not to take away from their projects, but it was like, they didn't get paid for it, they didn't, you know, they weren't trained well. It was like, you know, the one part that kept them from getting other parts because people only knew them as that, or you know. And for me, this was just one of the funnest things I ever got to do. And I'm really, you know, overjoyed that it's, you know, something that I get to be related to, you know, because it was well done too. I mean, there's so many projects you do too, and you're like, oh, this is my best work, and it never even sees the light of day, because for whatever reason, you know, as a theater actor, you do a run of a show, and only the people who came to see you in that theater every night are the only people that ever saw it. And you're like, this is the best work I could do, and it's right there on stage in front of a live audience. And unfortunately, you know, unless you do
Until they
something,
make a Broadway cast recording of.
yeah, or you know, you do something like Reefer Madness where they
Yeah.
make a movie out of it
Yeah.
or something, and then you get to, you know, bring a part that you really love doing on stage to the screen, to the big screen.
Well, we all love the Crypt Keeper. I think that's a given. Honestly, in my humble opinion, I think he is kind of the best part about the episodes, our intros and outros with good old Crypty.
Well, they do hold up. I mean, there is, you know, say what you want, but some of the episodes are fantastic, and some of them you're like, oh, that one was okay. It was fun, you know.
Yeah.
We tried to honor the comic book in everything that they did. They even would use the pages from the comic book sometimes as the storyboards.
Isn't that
you
kind
know,
of what a comic book is a storyboard, really?
It kind of is.
Well,
It is.
yeah.
I mean, not specifically, you know, to set up shots,
Right.
which is what the definition of the actual storyboard, but yeah, I mean, you know, your imagination just takes that one, and I mean, look at any kind of horror thing that you see from yesteryear till today, and every single bit of it has borrowed from those comic books, whether it was EC Comics or some of the other, you know, horror, you know, comic books you see. Oh, that guy from the swamp looks just like the guy from the swamp in that comic book, and that, you know, Spanish moss hanging from the trees is creepy, and that was all from the comic books, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you mentioned First and 10. We all know I'm a fan, but no lie. But how did you get involved? How did they pick you for First and 10? Like how did that kind of worms go?
Well, a lot of people don't know this, but like I said, I started in the theater, and theater pays shit, you know. I mean, especially back in the 80s when I was doing it. I think my first show in New York was an off-Broadway show, and I think I got paid $175 a week to do it. You can't live in Manhattan on $175 a week. So I used to street perform out in front of the Metropolitan Museum. You know, I'd climb the building across the street, and I'd hang a banner, and people could see me for 2 blocks, and they'd sit on the steps outside the museum, and all of a sudden I had an audience, and I'd perform and then pass the hat. You know, and I'd make $300, $400, up to $600 on the weekend doing shows, which in the 80s doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you got cash, you can at least eat and pay your rent. you know. So for years I tried, you know, still auditioning for theater, and finally I got a part in an off-Broadway show called Three Guys Naked from the Waist Down. And I know that sounds like a gay review in the Village, but it was actually a musical about stand-up comics. Naked from the Waist Down refers to how you might feel if you're standing in front of an audience and you're bombing, you know? And so it starred Scott Bakula, who we all know from all the wonderful shows, including Quantum Leap, myself, and a guy named Jerry Colker, who had been in Chorus Line and all these other shows. Who wrote the show, yeah. And, you know, and so think Dreamgirls, but with stand-up comics. It was that kind of show, yeah. So, you know, we played all the agents and the you know, the people who wrote for the magazines, you know. And so while I was doing the show, it was a big hit off Broadway. And all of a sudden, all these years I've been struggling in New York, all of a sudden I, you know, was getting offers to, you know, audition for all the big shows in New York. And I was like, great, I'm gonna have a, you know, I won't get paid a lot of money, but I'm gonna work a lot here in New York, you know. And while we were doing the show was the first season of Star Search with Ed McMahon as the host. And they came to me and they said, we want you to be on Star Search. And I'm like, what, as a singer? You know, because it's a musical. I said, you know, I could sing, but I'm no Sam Harris, who was killing it on the show, you know. And they go, no, we want you to be a stand-up comic. And I said, you know, I'm not really a stand-up comic, right? I'm playing a part. And they go, well, you can win $100,000. I'm like, fuck, can you see my act? So I started pulling out, like, all the bits that I used to do with Fred on the whole, you know, on the morning announcements, and what I used to do on the street and all this stuff. You know, I used to do like a bit where I'd do The Wizard of Oz in 10 minutes, like the entire movie, you know? And they were like, well, you got 2.5 minutes. So I'd be like, okay, I'll do The Wizard of Oz in 2.5 minutes. Is it twisted? Is it twisted? Dorothy, Dorothy, as cold a nut I must have heard I thoroughly. Oh, Rio, yo. What's them? What's them? That's the castle of the Wicked Witch. Oh, Dorothy's in that awful place. Oh, I hate to think of her in there. Fellas, we've got to get her out. I got a plan how to get in there, and you're gonna lead us. All right, I'll go in there for Dorothy. Wicked Witch or no Wicked Witch, gods or no gods, there's just one thing I want you fellas to do. What's that? Talk me out of it. You know, so, but I would do, you know, so I kept winning, you know, on the show. So I kept having to come up with some other bit. I'd have them wheel me out on a dolly and I'd be a 3-in-1 machine or something, you know. Just really wacky kind of Martin Short kind of stuff, you know. And I kept winning, so I wound up in the semifinals, and I beat a comedian who was just coming on the scene, Rosie O'Donnell, in the semifinals. And so I made it to the finals, and I beat another comic who's coming on the scene, Sinbad, in the finals. I win $100,000, and all of a sudden they're like, "You're gonna open for Tom Jones in Vegas." I go, "What?" Everybody's patting me on the back. "Oh my God, you're gonna open for Tom Jones in Vegas." I go, "I can't open for Tom Jones in Vegas." And they go, "Why not?" I go, "I got no fucking act. I've been making this shit up as I go, you know?" So I took all these bits that I've been doing, and so I didn't really have jokes, but I did all these characters and voices and stuff in my act. I kind of had created an act where I was a guy who was literally addicted to television. So I would get up there and like, "Hi, I'm John, I'm a tubaholic," and the audience, you know, getting it, especially in LA where they're all alcoholics, you know, in anonymous, you know, they're like, "Hi, John," you know, and then I proceed to like change channels on myself with a remote control and that kind of thing. So, you know, I had to start out with 20 minutes as an opening act for Tom Jones and Lou Rawls and the Temptations and the Four Tops on the TNT tour and Richard Belzer, all these different, Rodney Dangerfield. And the next thing you know, I'm auditioning for a bunch of shows. And really, First and 10 was just, I was supposed to come on and do 2 episodes as this Bulgarian field goal kicker, you know, who had just escaped from, you know, his Eastern Bloc country, but could kick 60-yard field goals.
By the way, he escaped, as he told it on a mock, you know, like show by kicking the ball and
Yeah.
chasing it further and kicking the ball and
He goes
chasing it
down,
further. That's how he escaped.
And he goes until he goes over the border, you know, nobody stopped him. But I remember my first scene that I was shooting was with O.J. Simpson was on the show as the general manager, and Jones, Flash Gordon, Sam Jones, thank you. My brain's old, sorry. As old as the Crypt Keeper at this point. But Sam, and I had a scene with them in a bar, and they were laughing so hard. OJ was one of the producers, but he goes, "We love this kid, we gotta have him back on." I wound up on the show in 6 years. But, you know, it was a great character. We had a lot of fun. I got to meet all my football heroes, which was really cool. And, you know, but they shot during the summer, so I could do, network pilot, shoot that show, and then if the network pilot got picked up, I got to do that series. So it was really kind of a really great opportunity for me. But again, you know, HBO, because they knew that I did all these voices and stuff in my stand-up and did this character, they knew that I would probably be able to bring something like the Crypt Keeper to life, and that's how I wound up getting the audition for Tales of the Crypt too. So HBO was very good to me in the early part of my on-camera career.
How long did it take to film your Crypt Keeper sequences? And were you and the puppet in the same room when you were doing the voice? And how did they match you, or did you match the puppet?
We've never been seen in public together. No, I'm just
Did they match the puppet match you, or did you match the puppet?
They had to match me, because I mean the puppet had 3 guys just making the face move. You know, I mean it was coordination of what they call buraku puppetry, which if you've seen that in the kabuki stage, it's like 2 guys in a black shroud moving the same puppet around that's full size and bringing it to life. Well, these guys were doing that with this puppet hidden behind the chair. Then there was guys with little remote controls working the face. It's pretty intricate and pretty expensive, which is one of the reasons why it was tough to do redo the show and that kind of thing. But so it was like doing a rock video. Most people know how rock videos are made. You pre-record your music and then you lip sync to it, because there's no way you're going to match take to take from different angles to the music by trying to sing it. You wouldn't be able to sing at the end of the day. So they pre-record the music and then you lip sync to it. Same thing with the puppet. They would record my performance and they would videotape it. I would pretend to be the Crypt Keeper and do physical things, and then all the puppeteers could coordinate with my voice. But if they had somebody down the set that was talking to the Crypt Keeper like this, rather than have them have to talk to a puppet and get all the puppeteers in there and other thing, I could be sitting there and talk to them. So like whether it was Arnold Schwarzenegger or Whoopi Goldberg or whoever was in the scene with me, I could do that. But otherwise, I would go in the studio. They'd have shot the show and get a tone for the show, so we would know, what kind of sly and fun things to maybe add to the Crypt Keeper sequence. And Kevin also directed a bunch of the Crypt Keeper sequences, as did the executive producer, the showrunner, Gil Adler, who was really great at it. He also directed some of my favorite episodes. So they knew kind of what they wanted to do, and then of course they cut me loose to make some funny shit, but they always wrote some great puns, Over the years, they would pimp out the Crypt Keeper for different commercials and stuff, and sometimes the copy, you'd be like, oh my God, this pun sucks. It just doesn't work, So that was the process, and it really, we would take our time with it because we wanted to be right, but in the beginning, because the Crypt Keeper's mouth didn't work very well, like I got in the studio with Kevin, he was like, and be like, hello kiddies, it's your old pal, the Crypt Keeper. And he was like, no, the mouth doesn't work very well. Can you make it like, make it slower? So if you watch the earlier episodes, the Crypt Keeper talks slower. So much so that some people have even come up to go, were you in the earlier episodes?
I was wondering if that was a technical limitation or if it was an artistic choice?
It became both because, I mean, sometimes there are no accidents, sometimes just, opportunities for inspiration. Because, the Crypt Keeper's mouth would be wet like this. It worked fun. It made it, it was a little creepier. But, as the Crypt Keeper evolved and we wanted to include more of my stand-up delivery to the character, and, the show was popular, and they gave Kevin more money to put more servos in the face and make it work better. We were able to make him, a much more colorful character. And then I'd come in and they go, well, you do impersonations. Let's do the Crypt Keeper as John Wayne, or let's do the Crypt Keeper as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, as Marlon Brand. Stella! And we do it, or, whoever. Let's have him do stand-up. Is this on?
I love this Forrest Gump.
Oh my God. Life is like a box of chocolates. And Bob Zemeckis, of course, who, directed Forrest Gump, was one of our executive producers and also directed some of my favorite episodes. And he would come in and use some of the special effects stuff that he was working on for his movies in the series. So there was a lot of cool things happening behind the screens on that show while we were doing it. Yeah.
Aside from Oil's Well That Ends Well,
Yes.
what are your favorite episodes? Because that's a cheat, because you were in it as yourself, is your face.
Oil's Well That Ends Well is funny because that was supposed to be the last episode they wanted to put me in. They kept asking me to be in an episode, but I was working like nonstop, thankfully, at that time on 3 different series, and I just didn't have the time. You had to commit to the time to do it. And I was supposed to be on an episode with Robert Daltrey. See, my brain is done after the weekend. With Roger Daltrey and Kelsey Brown, and it took place in Vietnam. I think they wound up hiring Steve Buscemi to play my part. But I was supposed to do that, and then I wound up having a pilot that I had to finish, and I wound up not being able to do it. So I wound up in Oil's Well That Ends Well, which was really appropriate, especially since they wrote in there they popped up out of a coffin and all that stuff, So it was a fun episode to do. I got to work with, Priscilla Presley and Lou Diamond Phillips, and also really Alan Ruck, some really cool, fun people in that episode. But I always loved Death of Some Salesman because Tim Curry is so fucking good in it.
Genius.
Playing Winona and the mother and the father. He's just so good. In fact, I went down to the set.
Ed Begley Jr.
What's that?
Ed Begley Jr.
Ed Begley Jr. is great in it, and Gil Adler, who was our showrunner, directed that episode. He did a great job. But I went down to the set. My parents were in town from the East Coast, and they had never seen anything shot live, so I took them down to the set the day that Tim Curry was dressed up like Winona, and they were like, "Who is that? Oh my God, she's so ugly." I go, "It's not she, it's Dad. That's Tim Curry." He didn't know who Tim Curry was either. My parents were very old school, and but they just got a kick out of it. He was charming as hell, but he didn't break character the entire time. I always loved Ventriloquist's Dummy with Don Rickles and Bobcat Goldthwait, because I used to collect ventriloquist dummies as a kid, but it's classic, Outer Limits had a ventriloquist dummy story, Twilight Zone had a ventriloquist dummy story, so it's classic that way, In fact, Morty, and that was Richard Donner directed that episode, of course, he was the Lethal Weapon and Superman and Goonies. I mean, he did an amazing job, but he loved Morty, who, was Don Rickles' twin brother,
Right.
was, on his hand. He loved him so much that he had him in a lucite box in his office, the actual little puppet that they used. So, but and I loved The Man Who Was Death with William Sadler, which was our first episode shown, but it's just really stylistic. They got Ry Cooder to do the music, and that was Walter Hill directed that movie. 48
The score on that
hours.
was just beautiful.
Yeah, really great.
Do we have any audience questions?
Yeah, sure.
Being you voiced Miko and Pocahontas,
Uh-huh.
And Pocahontas was a scary movie. How would the Crypt Keeper introduce it, and
Oh
what
my
would be
God.
the title of that episode?
How about Beware of the John? Might be the name of it. In tonight's terror tale, a Native American steps off the wrong canoe and finds herself knee-deep in trouble with only the help of a few fuzzy friends. In tonight's terror tale, beware of the John. I don't know, something like that.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So people like Jonathan Winters, Rich Little, where do you find your inspiration as far as?
Oh, forget it. Those guys were all, I mean, I loved those guys. I mean, they're, Rich Little more as an impersonator, but the actors that were physical and funny. And Jonathan Winters, I got to do a special with him with Showtime, which was just one of the honors of my life. Of course, it was bizarre trying to have, we had dinner together. I tried to have a conversation with him. He was just out there. I mean, what you saw is what you got with Jonathan Winters. But, I mean, I even loved the silent movies, but I loved the classic clowns, whether it was Charlie Chaplin or, Marcel Marceau. I mean, I loved doing that physical comedy as a kid. But then, of course, on television, I mean, I'm going way back to like Red Skelton, and they had all those really great shows with Dick Van Dyke, and all these guys that were really physically funny as well as being, personal. Obviously loved Mel Blanc as a voice. I mean, I loved cartoons as a kid. I loved the horror, the Universal horror monster movies were my favorite. I love those. Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein is still probably my favorite horror comedy, and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, they all influenced me. I really wanted to be that. That's what, and I was not a good student as a kid, not because I wasn't smart, but I was dyslexic and they didn't really know what that was. They just said I was lazy and disruptive. And of course I was disruptive. I was trying to be funny and, I was trying to participate, something that I was good at, But honestly, they may have developed my best performance skills, So, but I would do, the little shows at school and, and through high school, I did all the, the productions and that kind of thing. Like I said, I would do the morning announcements with my buddy Fred, and we would do the talent shows. He'd wheel me out on a dolly, and I'd be a 3-in-1 machine, and he'd be the guy hawking it, and we'd do that kind of thing. So it kind of developed from that kind of culture of comedy back in the day. One of the coolest things that ever happened for me was my very first, although First and 10 was my first series, my first pilot that I did for a network series was with Sid Caesar, who was already like 70 years old, and some of the younger people might not remember Sid Caesar, but he was on a live filmed show that was like Saturday Night Live of its time, and he was kind of like the John Belushi of his time. And those of you that are really into don't remember John Belushi, he was kind of no, I can't even go there. But, so I got to be on this show, which was kind of like a Broadway Danny Rose, where we were a bunch of comedians that hung out in the deli, bitching about our careers, and, all these other comics played like our agent, from the time that were all Vegas comics and stuff like that. And, I played the young comic hanging out with the older comics, and I was like, oh, I bombed, this critic wrote a bad thing about me. Don't worry about it, kid. It's just one critic's, Sid's like, it's just one critic with a red pencil. It's just his opinion. I remember this guy sitting in the audience, and he starts to blow up. It was always like I was always feeding, Sid Caesar's anger, and it actually got picked up for a number of episodes. But Sid was like 70-something years old. He was always keeping in shape, but he slipped down a hill walking through Truesdale, walking his dog, and broke his hip, and we never got to make the show. But you know, to have that honor to work with somebody who, you know, was revered throughout time as one of the great comedians of our time, to be able to just be in the same stage with them, you know, was really an amazing thing, you know. So, you know, I've had a lot of those dreams come true for me. I have had a lot of luck, but I also work really hard at it. I bet, you know, I mean, the first 5-6 years of my life, I mostly, you know, made my money street performing and stuff. It was not easy, but, you know, I just kept telling myself, this is how I need to make my career. This is what I need to do. Anything else would be harder for me, it felt like, you know. Yes, Silent Bob.
Yes. Chatty Bob today.
Yes, Chatty Bob.
I see that you have a very prolific video game voice acting background, including playing Deadpool in some of my favorite old school X-Men and Marvel games.
Oh, thanks.
So I was just curious what it's like preparing and I guess executing video game voice acting lines versus other things that you may spend more time with characters.
Right, you'd think it was easier, but it's harder, you know, because the guys who do it well, you know, that work all the time, they hire the same guys over and over and over again. You know, I mean, Deadpool, and for those of you that don't know, I was the original voice of Deadpool when he first showed up in games, which are the Ultimate Alliance games and X-Men Legends and yeah. And of course they thought of me because of the Crypt Keeper. They go, well, he talks to the camera, he's snarky, you know, do more of your own voice, but what a beautiful me, you know. And so I got the part. Of course, they don't like to keep you in the part because they're afraid you'll get too popular and not to pay you more. Plus, you know, they kept making him beefier, so then they started hiring guys like, you know, Nolan North to do that voice. And then but then, because they want to keep you on, they give you another voice where you're playing Pyro or somebody else like that. So you get to create all these different voices, and sometimes somebody else has already done it. And you come in and you think you're going to do what they did, and they're like, no, we want you to come with your own version. So that part of it's fun, but, you know, you're working on Halo, you know, playing some coward in a battle and stuff like that, and you're just going, it's not the same as doing like, I'll give you like I worked on Cat Dog, and Cat Dog was awesome. I played Mervis and Dunlap, and there were two characters that fought with each other. You know, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. So it was always really you kind of psychotic to play that character. But that had, you know, Tom Kinney, you know, who's one of the best in the business, and Jim Cummings playing Cat Dog, and then we had Billy West on there, you know, who's, you know, we all know Billy West, and then you had Carlos Alazraqui, who was, you know, Rocco and all these great, you know, the Taco Bell dog and all these great voices, and Dwight Schultz would come in, Mark Hamill would come in on every so many weeks and do these different characters. We had Maria Bamford, who's just a wonderful comedian who has this fun, sweet voice, who played one of the characters. And we would all be in the room together, laughing our asses off and going through the script. Every Tuesday we'd be there, we'd record it like Reader's Theater, laugh, get through it a couple of times, and it was recorded, and we'd go home. Well, the games, you go like line by line. Okay, do me eight versions of that line, do me 8 versions of, you know, so it's not that it's not fun. I mean, sometimes you get a game that's more like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's really fun because you're going through a script like it's a movie. And then other times, you're just ripping your vocal cords out, screaming over and over and over again, and stuff like that. But those shows were really great because the dialogue's really clever, it's dialogue heavy, and it's meant to engage with the player and that kind of thing. They were a lot of fun to do. You know, and then there's some of the other games. I mean, like Bayonetta was fun. I got to do like a, you know, Joe Pesci kind of, you know, Enzo's a fun kind of character. So, I mean, the ones that I get, it's because people think of me as something, they know I'll bring something fun. You know, the other stuff, I mean, I got to play the Joker in the Super Friends version, which is for little kids, you know, which was a lot of fun doing that kind of thing. But games are tough. Plus, it's not the same as the cartoons where they play them on TV over and over and over again, where you get, you know, like you don't get paid much up front, but the residuals are nice to get when you want to make your health insurance and you want to get, you know, pay your rent and all that stuff, you know. So, but it's fun. I really, there's certain games that just were some of the most fun stuff I've ever done. You know, and then of course there's holding up the Legend of Zelda. I was not in the game, but I was the original commercial for the game. I was a guy who was like trapped in the game. They did me up like Eraserhead, and I'm like running through the game, you know, and running around like fighting everything in my mind, you know, which was kind of fun and bizarre. You can find that on YouTube. Just look up John Kassir, The Legend of Zelda, and you'll see the original Zelda when you used to have a console this big and you put the big tape in it, right? just this one level above Pong. You know, Pong you used to hook up to your TV, you know. But thank you for that. That's a good question. But I mean, the animation is so much fun, you know. I enjoy doing it. And also because of the animal stuff that I've done, like Vigo the raccoon and that kind of thing, I get asked to do a lot of creature stuff, which is fun, but really hard on the voice. You know, doing that stuff is not easy to do over hours and hours of work. But it's a fun to do. Yes?
I was just curious, has Twisted Tunes, have they ever invited you for a session, or, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
The band?
No, they do a lot of panels, and during the pandemic, they like broadcast everything.
Oh.
And so as each of the characters, like Wacko, Yakko, Dot, they invite
Oh.
other celebrities and they read movie scripts, like, yeah, in character voices.
You know, I did that with Rob Paulson.
Yeah.
You know, and I did that on his show, and we did The Wizard of Oz. Only instead of doing the Wicked Witch, I was the Crypt Keeper,
Yeah.
and I did a bunch of other characters. I guess he did Dorothy as Yakko or something. I can't remember. And we had a lot of laughs. I worked with Rob for many, many years together. And he's also directs now, as does Charlie Adler, who I took over as Buster Bunny for it. And these are some of my favorite people, not only the most talented in the business, but also my favorite people that I've worked with over the years. So yeah, you can find that episode. It's probably there, but we had a good time doing it. Yes?
When do you think all your efforts started paying off?
Gosh, probably after I won Star Search, you know, because until then, although I had built a reputation of being somebody that you could hire for the stage or, oh, that guy, you know, in New York, nobody knew who I was. I couldn't make a real living at it, you know, although I really would only do stuff performance-wise to make a living. I didn't want to take a regular job because I didn't want that to detract from, you know, I'd rather like not have things than to do that. And luckily, I was, you know, when the weather was good, I could street perform. You know, like I had a friend who had a children's clothing store and I worked for them during the winter, or the paint store across the street, you know, kind of thing, you know, to make some minimum wage or whatever to you know, to get a slice of pizza downstairs at, you know, the local pizza place or whatever. But, you know, you really, at that point as an actor, you really feel like you're so far away from ever having a real career. And then something like Three Guys happens, and that was a hit off Broadway, and you start to go, oh wow, you know, starting to make enough of the name of myself, say that, because there's no, you don't think one job's ever going to do it for you, because it may put you in the light, but you know, some of the biggest stars and some of the people who've been around, you really have to respect that, because it's hard to get up there and stay there. You know, to say that, you know, I mean, when you think of somebody like Madonna, who's not really an actor, she's not even really the best singer out there, but she knows how to reinvent herself for the times over and over and over again. Of course, now she's way over reinvented herself, which you wouldn't even recognize her on the street, sadly. But that's what she was good at, so it makes sense that she did that to herself. You know, as an actor, you kind of burn out after a while having to reinvent yourself, because you know, other careers, once you establish yourself, you kind of get to do that the rest of your life. You know, whether you're a doctor or in an office building or something, unless you become obsolete in that career, and then you have to try to reinvent yourself, and nobody really wants to do that at a certain point in your life. But if you want to stay current as an actor, you have to continue to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. So it never ends, you know? But there is a point where you're like, okay, I'm making a real living at this. I think I can do it if I continue to, you know, be versatile. For me, it was about, you know, you win Star Search and everybody goes, oh, you're gonna be the next Robin Williams, you know, and then the next thing you know, you're doing improv with Robin Williams on the stage. And you're like, okay, maybe I will be the next Robin Williams. You go, and then you're like, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
You know, then you start to like get work where your characters are famous and you're not necessarily famous. And for me, that was like much more satisfying. I didn't really care about that. You know, I really enjoyed the fact I could go down the street and most people would not know who I was. You know, it's a double-edged sword because you don't get paid the most money unless you are, quote, celebrity. But I really feel privileged to have made you know, to been able to support myself as an actor for 43 years. Just that's all that matters to me. You know, and I have what I need. You know, thankfully. It could have worked out. You know, I mean, there's a lot of other actors. I know Broadway actors who won Tony Awards, and you know, other actors that have been on series, and they're at my age now, and they can't get jobs because they didn't set themselves up as much as versatile as I was. You know, there was a period I did a bunch of commercials because I had a stand-up comedy. They wanted me to be the funny, you know, Dr. Dreadful's Food Labs. You know, it was that guy. You know, I was getting paid, you know, a lot of money to be that guy. And then there was times I was doing stand-up comedy, and then there's times now, you know, now the voiceover stuff, I'm not typed out by my age, you know, what I look like, you know, I mean, they're not gonna hire me to play Deadpool in the movie, you know, even if I was the right age, they weren't gonna hire me to play Deadpool. Maybe a little sidekick would be a fun thing to throw in there, you know, just for the fans to know that, you know, oh, that's the guy that did the voice, you know. You know, but I don't even have to be human or alive, you know? And I can do a lot of my work from home. So I kind of love that aspect of my work. And if I want to go back and do theater for no money, I can go do that too, you know? But, you know, in terms of, Star Search was kind of a double-edged sword. I thought I had ruined my career at the same time as making my career because nobody knew that I was an actor. They just thought I was a stand-up comic. They wouldn't take me seriously as an actor. They wouldn't audition me for parts that I was capable of playing because they go, oh, he's a funny guy. You bring him in and play the Bulgarian field goal kicker, kick 60-yard field goals, you know, whatever, you know. He doesn't need to play, you know, this and that kind of thing. And then I worked really hard to establish myself as an actor, and then they're like, then they started giving all the stand-up comics their own shows on sitcoms, and they're like, you're not really a stand-up comic, you know. You're an actor who played a stand-up comic, who won Star Search, playing a stand-up comic, and now, you know. But I really can't complain. I have no regrets. You know, there's a certain amount of, you think you want this, but the audience, the business, the way they see you takes you down a different path, and you kind of have to listen to that. If you're smart, you follow that, and then you reinvent yourself along the way and show them that you can do things that they didn't know you could do. I think I'll end with that because I think that was a really great question. I want to thank you guys all for hanging out. I have a plane that's at 5, which means I'll probably have to leave here around 2:30. So, but I'll be at my table if anybody needs anything before I leave. But otherwise, I really appreciate it. It's not lost on me that people would show up to be interested in my career and the things that I've done, because together we've enjoyed many years of entertainment. And that's all they ever wanted to do was entertain an audience. Thank you guys for coming. Okay, thank you.
Or I can be in front of you.
No. I just wanted to say that I know a lot of people, can I get a picture of that mask? I'm type 1 diabetic, so it's kind of like the deal I made with my wife was I can go around thousands of people if I wear my mask. So I apologize that, it doesn't, that's what thank you.